Okay, hi again everyone. So today I wanted to look at fighters and some of the more sort of advanced features of fighters or features in which they differ from capital ships, which we've probably covered a bit more in the videos so far. So first couple of things just around how fighters move, one of which we've already actually covered to a great extent in the ballistic weapons tutorial, and that is escorting. So I just wanted to show you this screen. This is one of the games that I prepared earlier, and in it you can see that the Aurora Star Furies here are starting their movement on the same hex as the Omega Destroyer, and as a result they have the tooltip Escorting Omega Supreme, which is what I named the Destroyer. So if we just let the turn play out in the movement phase, we can see what happens. Actually, pause that a second. What you... No, we'll just go ahead. Ba, 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 ba. So the Omega does a wee shifty to the right and then left. Enemy just taking their movements, and that takes us up to present day, where everyone else. Other thing to note is that the Thunderbolts, I've got two squadrons of them here, have both launched missiles at the Brakiri ship there. But we were talking about escorting, so you can see these flight are escorting, these flight are not escorting. What that essentially means is if these Thunderbolts were to move on the same hex as the Omega Supreme, they wouldn't really do anything in terms of escorting, and they wouldn't be able to intercept any ballistic weapons. If, however, I end the Aurora on the same hex as the Omega Destroyer, then they can intercept any ballistic weapons, although it's a bit of a non-issue in this game because the Brakiri haven't brought any of their own missiles to the party. But that's just a quick refresh of what escorting is. The other thing I wanted to show you, I'm just going to finish the Auroras there, is Jinking. So probably something I should have covered in the movement video. It's specific to fighters, but we'll have a chance just now to go over it. And what I wanted to kind of show in this is the Thunderbolts doing a cool maneuver where they've launched their missiles and then they're going to turn around and they're going to peel off and feel like real heroes doing it. And when they get to the end of the movement, or actually at any point in the movement, you see that there's an icon here. It's kind of a zigzag with a plus. This is your jinking option. And what jinking is you can spend one thrust per level of jinking. So every time I press on that plus button, I spend one thrust, so 4 out of 13, press it once, 3 out of 13, and you'll see the tooltip changes at the bottom to evasion, -20 to hit. So every point of thrust is one level of jinking, which is -5 to hit that ship. It's also -5 for that ship to hit anything. So this Thunderbolt squadron launched its missiles and is the top of the two 12 times basic fighter missile tooltips there, and you'll see that it's now different from this Thunderbolt squadron, which also launched missiles under the same conditions, and they have a 90% hit. The reason for that is I'm jinking 4 times, so with each level of jinking it's -5% chance to hit you, but it's also -5% chance for you to hit anyone else, because the fighters moving about, the pilots having to concentrate, and so on. So it's a double-edged sword. It can keep your fighters safe, but it can also mean that your fighters find it more difficult to put out damage. So what I'm going to do is just sort of keep it 10, so we can see a noticeable difference in the fighters. Okay, and then commit to that one, and then just quickly move my last squadron of Thunderbolts, and we're going to do a similar peeling maneuver here, again simply to look a bit cool. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is just firing at things with fighters, because there's a couple of differences maybe that are worth going into. If we look at the Star Fury's gun, the Unipulse cannon, this is a very typical fighter weapon. It fires 2 shots but these shots are what we call linked, which means that when they roll to hit, and what I'm going to do is target the same ship here, when they roll to hit, they roll for a single hit location and both guns hit that location, so each one would do 5 to 10 damage on that location, and then that's because the guns are paired essentially, so they're firing two separate shots but basically in the same direction and they hit the same location. So that's very typical of fighters to have paired guns. You'll also see there an offensive bonus. I mentioned this briefly in a previous video, but because fighters don't have electronic warfare, what they have instead is an offensive bonus. So in this case it's 25, and that means there's a plus 25% chance to hit anything. So if we just look again at the targeting, this is a 35% chance of hitting that ship. How did it get there? Well, from the front, the Brakiri ship here has a 70% chance to hit. Now, eagle-eyed watchers will see, like, but it's the Brakiri ship has some defensive EW, so really the hit should be 50. Not in the case of fighters, because they don't have EW of their own. They also ignore defensive EW of enemy ships. And that's actually one of the ways in which fighters can be very useful. If you've got an enemy ship who's putting on really strong defensive sensors, well, the fighters ignore all that, and so long as you can get your fighters in safely and not shot out of the sky, then they can be a very useful way of getting through those defences. So let's just target that. And the hit chance was 35%. So it's 70 from the front, but the ship is 6 hexes away, and the fighter guns tend to be very short range, so the range penalty, where is it? Yep, 10 per hex. So I immediately lose 60% chance to hit just because I'm 6 hexes away, which would give me a 10% chance to hit naturally, but I've got my offensive bonus of 25, so that brings me up to 35, and that's how you work out your sort of fighter hit chance. Again, the system does it all for you, but sometimes it's useful to understand the sort of mechanics underneath. Now, I mentioned the possibility of your fighters being blown out of the sky. This is in relation to firing orders, so again, didn't really cover it in the firing video, but when the game works out firing, it basically, there's a set order to it. So fighters firing at ships occurs last, and that's really to give ships a chance to shoot down those fighters, or for enemy interceptor fighters like these guys here to shoot down fighters before they get a shot off at the capital ship. So generally speaking, ships will shoot ship first of all, ships will shoot fighters, fighters will shoot fighters, and then fighters will shoot ships. And understanding that firing order can be a very useful thing to know in how you're going to deploy it, because there would be no point charging into a vessel with a lot of anti-fighter weapons, and they've got their close combat EW waiting for you, because by the time all their guns have fired, you might not have any fighters left, and you're not doing any damage to that ship. So it's something that's important to understand to make sure you get best use out of your fighters, and you don't just throw them away. Okay, so let's have a think about the missile launches from my fighters. If we look at the hit chances again, you'll see that the bottom one has changed from 90% to 65%. So let's explain why that happened. So the bottom missiles came from the Thundercat squadron, and the Thunder Rats, although they've still 80%, they lost 10% because of their Jinking maneuver, they stayed at 80%. And the reason for that is they have an enhancement called a navigator, which costs extra points at the fleet selection phase. But what it means is that you can ignore, well, not ignore, but it means that one of the rules of missile launches doesn't apply. And that rule is that once your fighters launch the missiles, if they want to maintain their offensive bonus for that missile's hit chance, so in this case 25%, they have to maintain line of sight, so within that blue firing arc that you can see there on the target. And because I did my cool maneuver, my cool U-turn, I didn't maintain line of sight, and so the squadron without a navigator loses 25% chance to hit, and that explains the 90% down to 65. In terms of why is it 65, well, the missiles were launched from this hex, so it's to the front of the Brakiri ship. I said the defensive EW doesn't apply to fighters' guns, but it does apply to fighters' missiles in the same way that it applies to ship missiles. So the hit chance was 50. Fighter missiles, like the larger counterparts, do have a sort of innate bonus to hit, in this case 15, so 15 plus 50, 65% chance. But as I say, no longer benefiting from that normal offensive bonus. So had I been facing, that would have been plus 40% chance to hit, which is pretty large. Okay, but the navigator, like I say, they'll quite happily maintain their hit chance, but I paid for that when I chose this fleet. So having made this tactical blunder, is there anything that I can do about it? Well, potentially. And so this is sort of the last of the fighter maneuvers that I wanted to show, which is combat pivot. So again, on the tooltip you'll see that there's pivot cost, so that's during the movement phase if you want to pivot, and then there's combat pivot cost. And this, unlike ships, means that fighters can still have limited maneuverability even during the firing phase. So for a cost of 2 thrust, I can pivot 1 turn round the hex. If I do it twice, then all of a sudden that ship is back within my firing arc, and as if by magic I get the 85, well, I get 20% of my chance back, and that's because I lose 5 because of the pivot maneuver. So 85% still a lot better than 65%, so could be worth doing. 2 things about combat pivoting can be very useful. If, say, these fighters had swooped in to the side of my fighters, I wouldn't have been able to return fire because without the combat pivot my guns are pointing the wrong way. But I could pivot round and shoot back. So it can be very useful for that, but it does require thrust. It requires quite a lot of thrust actually, 2 per direction. So if you wanted to turn all the way around, that's 6 thrust. It also means at the start of next turn my fighters are pointing this way, but momentum is carrying them this way. So I'll need to correct that. I wouldn't be able to vary my speed, and I might pay for using the combat pivot this turn. But that's a tactical choice that you need to make, and is very situational. So nonetheless, can be a very useful maneuver, and is one of the many ways in which fighters differ from capital ships. Okay, so that's the sort of last of the maneuvers. There is one other thing that I want to show you, just regarding fighters. Well, 2 things really, but what I'm going to need to do is switch to the other side. So give me a second. And in a miracle of editing, I am now playing the Brakiri side, including this hapless cruiser here. So 2 more things I want to show you. I picked a couple of sort of special-ish fighters on the opposing side. We'll start with the Brakiri heavy fighters, very heavy fighters actually, the Paquitos. And you'll see that they have 2 weapons. One is a light gravitic bolt, which is a sort of pretty standard fighter weapon. Not that different from the Aurora, certainly not different in how it functions, but they also have a larger weapon, a light graviton beam. And you can see that this weapon does much more damage. Its range penalty is half of the normal fighter weapons, only 5 per hex, which effectively gives it twice as much range, but still benefits from the fighter advantages of ignoring defensive EW and the offensive bonus of 25. You can see from its fire control it's pretty useless against other fighters. So this is a weapon that you fire from short to medium range, and try and score some major damage against ships. And there are a number of heavy fighters in the game, not always heavy, but a number of fighters in the game that have heavier weapons, and usually that means the fighter's quite expensive, but it can be used quite well, can do quite a lot of damage if these fighters aren't intercepted or dealt with in some way. So always have a look out for that. You'll notice it's also 3-3, so This weapon actually takes 3 turns to recharge. The normal weapon can be fired every turn. Something else I think that's worth noting about it is that if we just target, so 70%, 75% chance to hit, so that's pretty good. And I'll be like, wow, I've got other guns, I want to fire them as well. A lot of fighters with heavy weapons won't let you fire them two together, and the game will keep you right on that one. Or if the fighter is allowed to fire both weapons together, what you might find is that there's a hit penalty for firing both together, because again the pilot has to divide their attention, and so your hit chances go down, and you just have to decide what's more important to you, having more weapons firing or making sure the big guns hit. I'll leave that up to you. And the last thing that I just wanted to show in this video is some fighters can have shields. And some fighters can ram. In fact, I think all fighters eventually will be able to ram. But that hasn't been implemented just yet. But I just wanted to show you the shield. So this is an Abai fighter, clearly just helping out their Brakiri pals in this instance. It's got a full arc, and what it essentially means is that hits that come into that fighter would take 1 less damage because the shield strength is 1, and the fighter is also slightly harder to hit. But there's going to be a later video about advanced mechanics overall. I just wanted to try and cover everything that possibly could happen with fighters in this one. So yeah, there's a small selection of fighters that have shields. That should be the important takeaway from this video. Okay, so thanks again for listening. Hope it was informative. And yeah, if you've got any feedback or if there's anything else that you would like me to sort of talk through in a future video, do let me know.